They say when you buy a house, you're investing in your future. A place to plant roots, raise a family, maybe even find peace. But no one ever warns you about the battles you might face once the moving truck pulls away. I wasn't looking for conflict. I just wanted a quiet life, a backyard for my dog, maybe a grill for the weekends. But what I got was a battlefield with sidewalks, all because one woman decided her clipboard gave her absolute power. This isn't just a story about a wall. It's about what happens when ordinary people are pushed too far, and what it really takes to stand your ground when the rules are used as weapons. My name's Ethan, and this is the story of how I built a barricade, not just out of steel, but out of principle. The house on Hawthorne Lane wasn't just a house. For Ethan Ward, it was a second chance, a clean slate. Nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Silver Creek Estates, the two-story colonial, with its wraparound porch and creaking oak trees, felt like something out of a catalog for the American dream. He had signed the deed on a quiet Friday morning, his heart heavy but determined. After losing his wife to cancer a year earlier and walking away from his high-stakes job as a federal prosecutor, Ethan needed this: peace, quiet, control over something, anything. He arrived on a cloudy Saturday with little more than a mattress, a dog-eared book of legal precedents, and a half-finished wooden bench his wife had started building before she got sick. He placed it in the backyard, under the shade of an old pine, where he liked to sit in silence. By Sunday, he had already gotten his first visit. It was 7:48 a.m. Ethan was sipping lukewarm coffee from a mug that read, "Justice Never Rests," when a sharp knock rattled the front door. He opened it to find a woman standing there with a clipboard tucked beneath her arm, like a weapon, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Ward, I presume," she said, without waiting for confirmation. "Belinda Crowley, HOA president. Welcome to Silver Creek." She handed him a glossy welcome packet, and then, with surgical precision, began pointing out what she called minor concerns. "The mailbox is 1.5 inches too high. Trash bins must be behind the side gate, not beside it. Also, per Section 4C, no unapproved lawn ornaments. So that bench? You'll need to submit a formal request." Ethan blinked. "It's a bench for sitting." Belinda gave him a tight smile. "Silver Creek takes aesthetics very seriously, Mr. Ward." He watched her walk off with the kind of stride that said this wouldn't be their last encounter. He wasn't wrong. The next week, he received 2 formal violation notices, one for a porch light that was uncommonly bright, the other for having a non-regulation hose reel. Ethan chuckled at first. He thought maybe she just had too much time on her hands. Then came the third notice: unauthorized construction of wooden fence. That one hit a nerve. The fence was modest, 6 feet tall, honey-stained pine, enclosing the backyard for privacy, and, more personally, to protect the memory of his wife. She'd always dreamed of a garden where roses bloomed untamed, where they could sit quietly and read. Ethan had started that garden. The fence was the frame for it. He called the HOA number listed on the notice. It went straight to Belinda. "You didn't submit plans, Mr. Ward," she said flatly. "It violates subsection 5A of our exterior modifications clause." "I read the clause," Ethan replied calmly. "Fences under 6.5 feet and not visible from the front of the house don't require approval." "Yes, well," Belinda's voice tightened. "It may not be technically prohibited, but it's highly discouraged, and some residents have complained." "Which residents?" Ethan asked. "That's confidential." He paused. "So, just you?" There was silence on the line, then a click. That was the moment he knew this wasn't about rules. This was about power. Belinda Crowley didn't care about aesthetics. She cared about control. And Ethan, former prosecutor, trained to sniff out abuse of authority from a mile away, wasn't about to roll over. Still, he didn't react. Not yet. Instead, he started attending HOA meetings, quietly, observing. He watched as Belinda shot down requests for flower beds that were too expressive, fined a single mom for having wind chimes that made excessive noise, and told an elderly couple their American flag needed to be removed because it clashed with the color harmony of their house trim. Ethan didn't confront Belinda right away. That wasn't his style. You don't win cases by rushing to the podium. You win by building evidence, fact by damning fact. So he began documenting, quietly, meticulously. He took photos of every approved fence in the neighborhood, many taller or flashier than his. He dug through HOA bylaws like they were a legal deposition, highlighting contradictions, inconsistencies, and vague clauses designed for subjective interpretation. He even noted how Belinda had signed off on her own home's custom pergola without board approval. Still, the notices kept coming. By mid-October, Ethan had received a final warning letter with escalating fines for non-compliance. It stated that unless he removed the fence, the HOA would take action to have it dismantled, at his expense. That's when things turned from petty to personal. Ethan came home one evening to find a bright orange tag stapled to the fence. Notice of violation, subject to removal. He pulled it off and walked around the yard, fuming. That's when he noticed the ground behind the fence had been disturbed. A fresh trench, about 8 inches deep, ran from the fence post straight toward the edge of his property line. It had been hastily refilled, but he could see where the dirt had settled unnaturally. He dug it up that night with a flashlight clenched between his teeth. What he found made his blood run cold. A severed irrigation pipe, cleanly cut, and a trail of water-soaked soil leaking into Belinda's yard. It was sabotage. Subtle, deniable, but unmistakable. His fists clenched as he stared at the damage. He wasn't just dealing with an overzealous HOA president anymore. He was dealing with someone who didn't mind bending the rules when they didn't suit her agenda. And worse, someone who thought she could get away with it. The next morning, Ethan paid a visit to his neighbor 2 doors down, Frank Ramirez, a retired civil engineer with a well-known dislike for Belinda. "I'll be honest," Frank said, leaning over his porch rail. "I've seen her pull stunts before. Had a buddy who built a backyard sauna within code, but Belinda called the fire marshal anonymously and had him cited for unsafe fumes. It took months to clear." Ethan nodded slowly. "I need to find out how deep this goes," Frank smirked. "I might know a guy." That guy turned out to be Darren, a former HOA board member who had resigned 6 months earlier. Ethan met him at a diner just outside town. Darren came in looking over his shoulder and ordered a coffee like it might be bugged. "Let me guess," he said without preamble. "You've got a fence, and Belinda hates it." Ethan nodded. "Among other things." Darren let out a long breath. "She's got the board under her thumb. Makes him think she's protecting property values. But really, she's got a vendetta against anyone who doesn't fall in line." He sipped his coffee, then added, "And she's not above weaponizing HOA funds to keep it that way." That was Ethan's opening. He leaned in. "You have proof?" Darren hesitated. "Maybe. She rerouted funds last year, said it was for community safety upgrades, but I never saw anything new. No receipts, no itemized reports. When I asked questions, she had the board label me disruptive and forced a vote to remove me." Ethan tapped his fingers against the table. "Would you be willing to go on record?" Darren raised an eyebrow. "Are you planning to sue the HOA?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm planning to change it." That night, Ethan started gathering signatures for a petition to call a special HOA meeting. He needed 25% of the homeowners to sign, enough to force the board into session without Belinda's consent. He went door to door, calmly explaining his situation. Some neighbors shut the door in his face, but others, especially those who had quietly endured Belinda's reign of nitpicking, signed with eager pens. By the end of the week, he had more than enough. As he dropped the signed petition into the HOA Dropbox, he allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Belinda had picked the wrong neighbor to bully. And now the war was official. The special HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the local rec center. The folding chairs were hard, the air stale with the smell of old carpet and new conflict. Belinda arrived 15 minutes early, clipboard in hand, hair sprayed into submission, and her signature red lipstick drawn like war paint. She took her seat at the head of the board table, flanked by the remaining members, Margot, Philip, and Todd, who looked about as enthusiastic as tax auditors at a summer barbecue. Ethan came alone. No lawyer, no entourage, just a binder full of documentation and a confidence Belinda had not expected. The room filled quickly. More than half the neighborhood had shown up, some curious, some angry, a few clutching reusable mugs like it was a courtroom drama with free refills. Belinda opened the meeting with her usual sanctimonious tone. Let's begin. This emergency session was requested by Mr. Ethan Morris regarding what he claims to be procedural concerns. What Ethan stood, nodded politely, and placed his binder on the small podium near the front. Thank you. I'll keep this simple. He opened to the first page. In the last 2 months, I've received 7 violations regarding a fence that is not in breach of any current HOA regulation. I have reviewed the HOA guidelines, spoken to former board members, and compiled comparisons with other approved structures in this neighborhood. He clicked a small remote and a portable projector flickered on behind him. A slide showed a series of photos, fences from around the neighborhood, some even taller or more garish than his. No formal approval was granted for these structures. No citations were issued, but mine? Fined daily. Why? Belinda straightened in her chair. Because it's not just about structure, Mr. Morris. It's about aesthetics, harmony, community values. He held up a hand. Right. Let's talk about community values. He flipped to the next tab. In 2022, the HOA budget allocated $12,000 to beautification and maintenance projects. That's line item 14B. He pulled out a printed spreadsheet. But there are no receipts filed under that category. And the vendor listed for 3 of those projects? A company called Redwell Services, owned by a man named Peter Graves. He let that hang in the air a moment. Peter Graves, who also happens to be Belinda's brother-in-law. A ripple went through the room. People began murmuring, shifting in their seats. Belinda laughed, sharp, hollow. That's a ridiculous accusation. Is it? Ethan asked, lifting a receipt. Here's a service invoice. Community fence restoration, $3,200. Except that fence doesn't exist. It was never built. And Redwell Services, as far as I can tell, doesn't have a website, a license on file with the county, or even a public phone number. He turned to the crowd. This isn't just about a fence anymore. This is about selective enforcement, about financial misconduct, about a leadership that's used its position not to serve the community, but to control it. Belinda was red-faced now, her jaw clenched, but before she could interrupt, someone else stood up. Janet, one of the newer residents, clutched a paper in her hand. I'm sorry, she said, voice shaking slightly. I found this on my doorstep last week. She held up an anonymous violation notice she'd received. For wind chimes. But I've had them up for 3 years. The same kind they sell at Home Depot. But after I signed Ethan's petition, I got this. Belinda's voice rose, brittle and defensive. We cannot allow people to defame the HOA with baseless... Margot, one of the board members, finally spoke. Belinda, I've been on this board with you for 4 years, and I've asked more than once to see financial breakdowns for these projects. You always said the records were being digitized or processed, but I think we need a real audit. Todd, who had looked bored until now, nodded. Agreed. The room buzzed. Ethan closed his binder. I'm not here to burn the HOA to the ground. I want accountability. I want transparency. And I want a community, not a kingdom. Belinda stood, her voice trembling with fury. This is mutiny. No, Frank said from the back of the room. It's democracy. You should try it sometime. For the first time, Belinda looked genuinely shaken. Not by Ethan, but by the crowd. They weren't nodding with her anymore. They were watching, judging. The vote for a financial audit passed unanimously. Belinda's hands trembled slightly as she picked up her clipboard, lips pressed in a thin line. She didn't know it yet, but her power was slipping through her fingers. And Ethan? He wasn't finished. Not yet. The audit wasn't just a formality. It was a grenade, and the pin had officially been pulled. By the following week, the HOA board had appointed an independent financial examiner, a retired CPA named Helen Yu, who lived in a neighboring community and had zero tolerance for nonsense. She arrived with a binder thicker than a phone book and a calm, surgical precision that terrified Belinda more than Ethan ever could. Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The tide had shifted. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved. A few even knocked on his door with copies of old violations, questioning whether they, too, had been targeted unfairly. One of those neighbors, Carol, an elderly widow who had been fined $150 for improper mailbox decor, showed Ethan a handwritten note she'd found tucked into the violation envelope. The note read, in shaky cursive, "If you want to avoid further fees, consider supporting the HOA's spring fundraiser. Belinda." It was subtle, but it was blackmail. Ethan scanned it, added it to his file. Meanwhile, Helen began combing through 5 years of financials. Within days, she uncovered a litany of inconsistencies. Duplicate payments to Redwell Services, personal reimbursements filed as security improvements, and funds withdrawn in cash, often just below the threshold that required a co-signature. At the next board meeting, Helen presented her findings. The atmosphere was tense. Belinda was pale. Her arms crossed so tightly her knuckles turned white. Helen spoke with calm clarity. "Based on the available documents, I've found over $22,000 in expenses that cannot be justified under HOA guidelines. There are also 6 payments made to vendors with no proof of work completed, 3 of which are tied to Redwell Services, a company linked to Ms. Belinda Marsh's family." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Belinda stood abruptly. "This is a witch hunt, a smear campaign by a man who built a prison wall in the middle of our neighborhood." Helen didn't flinch. "The records speak for themselves. I recommend a motion for temporary suspension pending further investigation." The board didn't hesitate. Margot raised her hand first, followed by Todd, then Philip. 3 hands. Belinda's voice cracked. "You're voting me out based on hearsay?" Janet, who had joined the board just that week, looked her dead in the eye. "No. We're voting you out because you broke the trust you swore to uphold." The vote passed. Belinda didn't storm out. She didn't scream. She simply sat down, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, and stared ahead blankly. But the silence didn't last long. 2 days later, Ethan received a certified letter in the mail. Belinda was suing him for defamation, slander, and emotional distress. The letter accused him of orchestrating a public humiliation campaign, falsifying financial records and intentionally inflicting emotional trauma. The lawsuit demanded $50,000 in damages, a formal apology, and the removal of the barricade. Ethan couldn't help but laugh. She was still trying to win through intimidation. He handed the letter to his attorney, Marisol Rivera, a sharp-witted litigator who once took down a corrupt city official for embezzling streetlight funds. She reviewed the case with a raised eyebrow. "She's got no shot," Marisol said. "But this tells me one thing. She's desperate." That night, Ethan stood on his porch watching the barricade reflect the soft amber of the streetlights. It had gone from a symbol of defiance to something more. People had started calling it the Wall, half joking, half reverent. Some even said it brought peace. No more unsolicited visits from Belinda, no more fines for garden gnomes or string lights. And then something surprising happened. A teenager from 2 blocks over came by and shyly handed Ethan a hand-drawn sign that read, "Thank you for standing up." The kid's name was Lucas. His mom had been fined $300 last year for repainting their front door a shade too bold. She'd cried, quietly, for weeks. Lucas remembered. Ethan took the sign, thanked him, and hung it on the inside of the barricade, facing inward. A reminder of what mattered. This wasn't just about fences, finances, or even Belinda anymore. It was about restoring something that had been taken. Dignity, fairness, and the simple freedom to live without fear of a clipboard. And as the court date approached, Ethan knew one thing with certainty. The real battle hadn't been about the wall outside. It was about the wall the community had let Belinda build between them all. And that wall was finally coming down. It was the morning of the court hearing, and the sky over Willow Creek was a gray canvas, flat, still, and heavy. The kind of morning that felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan adjusted his tie in the bathroom mirror, took a deep breath, and reminded himself this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about setting something right. Across town, the courthouse buzzed with tension. Local news had picked up the story after a Reddit post featuring Ethan's steel barricade, and the HOA showdown went viral. The caption had read, "Suburban warfare. Man builds a wall, ends HOA tyranny." And it exploded online. Memes followed. So did the cameras. Belinda arrived late, dressed in a powder blue blazer that didn't hide the tremble in her hands. Her cousin, Redwell's so-called contractor, trailed behind her, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. The courtroom filled with familiar faces from the neighborhood. Janet sat near the back. So did Mike and Carol. Even Lucas's mom showed up. Ethan didn't ask them to come. They showed up on their own, because it wasn't just about a barricade anymore. It was about accountability. Inside, the hearing began. Ethan's attorney, Marisol, presented first. Calm, methodical, unshaken. She introduced every piece of evidence. The baseless fines, the verified audit, the messages from Belinda to Redwell Services, even the footage showing her measuring lawns with a ruler at 6 a.m. Belinda's attorney, a younger man who looked increasingly regretful about taking the case, tried to argue emotional distress, harassment, and reputational damage. But the judge, an older woman named Judge Hastings with an air of ironclad patience, wasn't buying it. "Well, Miss Marsh," the judge said finally, folding her hands over the bench, "you're asking for compensation over a situation you instigated, involving structures you failed to regulate, while under financial investigation yourself." Belinda opened her mouth. No sound came out. "Dismissed," the judge said, with prejudice. The courtroom remained silent for a heartbeat. Then murmurs of approval echoed around the room. Outside, reporters rushed toward Ethan, but he declined to speak. He wasn't here to gloat. He just wanted it over. But it wasn't over yet. 3 days later, the full HOA audit was published. Helen Yu had done her work with brutal efficiency. Over $37,000 had been misused or lost under Belinda's watch. Redwell Services was revealed to be a shell company, registered in the name of Belinda's cousin, with no license, no address, and a single bank account that matched the same used for HOA reimbursements. The board wasted no time. A formal vote to permanently ban Belinda from holding any HOA office again passed unanimously. The HOA filed a civil suit against her, seeking restitution for the stolen funds and punitive damages for the mismanagement of community assets. The local news ran a special on the barricade that brought down the queen of HOA. And then she was gone. Belinda moved out under cover of night. Her house was listed anonymously by a third-party broker. Stripped of her signature, "Compliance is community" sign that used to hang proudly on her porch. Neighbors gathered informally on Ethan's lawn the night she left. Some brought drinks, others just showed up to say thanks. No more surprise violations. No more stress over lawn heights or mailbox angles. The mood was light for the first time in years. Mike raised a toast with a solo cup of lemonade. "To Ethan," he said, "for building the wall we all needed." Everyone laughed. Ethan smiled, lifting his glass. "To community," he replied. "The real kind." The barricade still stood, tall and proud. But it wasn't a symbol of division anymore. Someone had painted a mural on it. A beautiful, vibrant piece, showing hands building something together. Lucas had started it. His mom helped. A few others pitched in. It transformed the wall from a protest to a monument. And when election time came around, Ethan didn't run. He nominated Janet. She won unanimously. The HOA rules were rewritten, with clear limits on board powers, a transparency requirement, and term limits. No one wanted another Belinda. As for Ethan, he kept to himself mostly, fixed up his backyard, grew tomatoes, helped Lucas build a birdhouse that passed inspection on the first try. But when he looked at that mural, he remembered exactly what that fight had cost, and what it had given them all back. Because sometimes, the only way to fix a broken system is to build a wall strong enough to shake it down from the foundation, and then you invite your neighbors over and plant something better in its place. The air in Willow Creek had shifted, not just in temperature or breeze, but in tone. Gone were the tense stares and clipped conversations about hedge height or mailbox paint. A calm had settled over the neighborhood like the first quiet after a long, hard storm. Ethan stood on his front lawn one bright Saturday morning, coffee in hand, gazing at what used to be a war zone. The steel barricade still stood proud along his property line, but now it bore color, life, and something unexpected: hope. The mural that had started as a quiet rebellion had grown into a community project. Kids came with chalk, adults added patterns. Someone painted the words, "Strong walls, open hearts." It wasn't just a wall anymore. It was a symbol of pushback, of progress, of people finding their voice when rules had once silenced them. Inside the newly restructured HOA, Janet had taken to her role as president with balance and empathy. No more surprise notices, no more threats. Transparency meetings were held every month in the community center, open-door style. Every homeowner got a voice. Janet personally stopped by Ethan's house one afternoon. "We're planning a block party," she said, holding a flyer decorated with streamers and a cartoon grill. "No paperwork required, just food, music, and neighbors." "Like how it should have been all along," Ethan smirked. "Only if there's no grass ruler involved," Janet laughed. "That thing's buried somewhere in Belinda's garage and hopefully stays there forever." He agreed to come. And when the day arrived, something incredible happened. Families who'd once kept to themselves came out smiling. Retirees brought lawn chairs and stories. A high school band set up in someone's driveway and played everything from jazz to classic rock. Kids ran circles around the barricade mural like it was some magical monument. And when the sun dipped low and fairy lights flickered on, someone raised a toast again, this time not to rebellion, but to rebirth. "To neighbors who stuck it out," Mike called. "To a place where we can breathe again." Cheers erupted. Ethan stood quietly off to the side, watching Lucas chase fireflies. His dog lay beside him, belly up, relaxed in a way she hadn't been in months. Peace had returned, not because the fight hadn't happened, but because it had been worth it. Later that night, as people packed up and the music faded, Ethan sat alone on his porch steps. The barricade loomed in the soft glow of garden lights. He considered taking it down, but not yet. Not because he needed the protection anymore, but because it reminded him, and everyone else, of what standing up looked like. The next morning, Gail, the artist behind the mural and a retired art teacher, came by with a small metal plaque in hand. "I thought it deserved something official," she said, placing the plaque at the base of the mural. It read, "The Wall of Reason, built in protest, painted in unity, kept in memory." Ethan blinked. "Gail, this is..." She smiled. "It's not just your wall anymore?" It belongs to all of us. He nodded, touched. Words escaped him, but his heart felt full. A few months later, a letter arrived. It wasn't from the HOA, the city, or the courts. It was from Belinda. A single page. No return address. Typed. Ethan, you win. I lost sight of what this place was supposed to be. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do hope the community you helped build lasts longer than the control I tried to maintain. Maybe someday I'll find a place I can call home too, without needing to rule over it. B. Ethan read it twice, folded it slowly, and tucked it into the back of the HOA rulebook. Now rewritten, fair and open. The story didn't end with fireworks or lawsuits or dramatic exits. It ended with neighbors talking again, kids playing without fear, and a wall standing tall. Not as a warning, but as a witness. To the ones who pushed back, to the ones who rebuilt, and to the power of one man, one choice, and one chainsaw on a quiet street that had forgotten how to listen. Ethan smiled to himself. Some wars were worth fighting. Not for the win, but for the peace that followed.